Gaudete, gaudete, Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine gaudete.
Hey everybody, this is Great Pharaoh with you today. I'm here with Stilgar and Ivor Kovac. We are going to be talking about a very well-known saint, Saint Rita of Cascia, or at least it is getting to be well known here. This Saint Rita of Cassia, nobody really knew about her story till 500 years after her passing. It wasn't until some people were making prayers, certain requests, and a nun would appear to them in a vision and granting that prayer, and then that person would say, "Well, who are you?" And then she would say, "Well, my name is Rita. My name is Saint Rita." And they would then there was enough people hearing about her that they wanted to go. I think they maybe she told them what monastery she stayed at, and then when they went to that convent, not monastery, convent for women, they would tell the eventually they would be able to recollect all her stories, so her life and everything. So this was very similar to the other previous Saint Veronica in the previous video. But okay,
So Great Pharaoh, maybe a quick question here from Stilgar. What time are we talking about? What? So you're saying 500 years? So when were people getting the visions, and what time was he alive?
yeah, thank you so much. Excellent question. She was living during the 14th and 15th century, and she lived, I think, till she was maybe in her. I think she was 70. I think she came to the monastery when she was uh, 34, and I think passed away when she was 74. Something to that effect. She was there for 40 years. People are now that she's already have. There's hundreds of churches in her names, hundreds of small chapels. Not I wouldn't say hundreds, but a lot of small churches and things like that all over the world. And and a lot of people in the Catholic community are becoming aware and knowing the saint's story. So,
I got a question. I'm sorry. Maybe you're going to cover it, but what is her feast day? Because I know, like with the Catholic saints, they usually have a feast day associated with them once they get that status.
Yeah. So the feast day is on the May 22nd. Is her feast day, and that's when the people they can go to the monastery where her body is still there and preserved, and I believe it's in the major shrine of Basilica of Santa Rita de Cascia in Italy. So May 22nd, a lot of people will go, and they will pray the service, pray the divine liturgy during her feast day. They'll maybe sometimes they'll have roses. They'll have roses on that day. Take it with them to the service. I can explain that later about why the roses. Besides it just being a common thing to take to a shrine or whatnot, but there's a specific reason. So May 22nd is her feast day, and yeah, you can go there now. There's her body is incorrupted. It's been preserved all these years, 500 years. It's been, and people are now the last 100 years she's starting to be well known. So she died on 1457, and she was 76. So we're talking about late 14th century. She was in the monastery for 30 years, so she must have, or 40 years. So she came to the monastery when she was 36. And so, yeah, late 14th century and then mid 15th century. Okay. She is also considered the patronage saint for the lost and impossible causes, sickness, wounds, and marital problems. And we'll get into that later as to why those specifically many people call upon her for these types of prayers and requests. So she got married at an early age to a very abusive husband, and the relation lasted more than 18 years. She was a model wife, and she prayed constantly. She was very a fervent Christian. She was raised by Catholic parents, Um, and she married actually at a young age when she was like 12. And she actually had wanted to be a nun. So back in that time in Italy, it was normal for women to be married that young. And even though she wanted to be a nun her whole life, you had to obey your parents. Back in that time, uh, whatever your parents told you to go to a convent or get married, that was essentially considered the will of God. So she obeyed. She married this man, but he turned out being a very violent, hostile man, and he'd get into a lot of problems with. He got in a feud with another family, and I don't know the details of it, but he was just a very harsh man. You know, just the kind of guy that um, didn't take things easily or as they come. Very stubborn, and got into a heated feud with with another family. And so he ended up getting murdered by some men from that family that he got in an argument with. And she had two sons. She bore two sons from him. So they were trying to seek revenge. And so the story goes that she prayed to God. She said, I want you, Lord, to take my sons. I'd rather them pass away than to be murderers and to seek vengeance and be in risk of hellfire for that, right? So today, she is known, like I said, as the patron saint for more specifically abused women. Um, uh, uh, People in troubled relationships, impossible relationships. Um, Many ladies can turn to her in general in times of despair, um, and or if there's like a divorce going on or something like that, or even I even heard that she performed a miracle for a lady who couldn't bear children for over 10 years, and she asked Saint Rita to intercede on her behalf, and she bore her daughter, and now she's like 30 something years old, and she's amazing and wonderful, and loves God, loves the church and everything. So she's also often depicted in artwork, such as like medals and stuff like that, like little, yeah, like little small little medals that you just wear, you can carry with you, and many people have her as their intercessor, their favorite saint. So she's also seen as wearing a crown of roses as well, and I'll get to that later with the roses. Um, uh, so so now that we know, okay, so she got married and she had these two sons, and later on, eventually after her two sons passed away, and her husband also, we know that he passed away. Then she decided to go to the convent to be a nun. Her original name, she was born in 1381 in the city of Umbria, Italy, and her name was Margherita Lodi, and like I said, she was raised by very pious parents, raised in the church, and she was given the nickname of Rita from her youth. She was baptized in the Church of Saint Augustine and became familiar with the Augustinian nuns order of Saint Mary Magdalene during her youth. So, like I said, she was attracted from a very young age, and she always wanted to become a nun. So it was part of Lord's will for her, but but He'd will for her to get married as well, because now that she's experienced both the life of celibacy, or the life of nuns, and consecration, also of marriage, she's a very big saint, and she appeals to so many people now. So like I said, she was married when she was 12 years old. Her husband, his name was Paulo. So I'm getting into more details now of her family and the situation that took place. He was an immoral man. He was very violent with her. He was very abusive towards her. He insulted her, and she just kept being humble and kind and patient. And eventually, by her prayers, she turned her husband to be better, more of a calmer man. Um, and her two sons was Giannacomo and Antonio, or no, sorry, um, Giovanni Antonio and Paolo Maria. And she raised her sons to be in the faith as well. They were very pious Christians, her two sons. But then there was a fight that broke out between the Chiqui and the Mancini families, and it became very intense. And Paolo, her husband, was stabbed to death by a guy named Guido Chiqui, who's part of the Chiqui family.
I got a question, Great Pharaoh.
Yeah.
Hearing about this kind of actually reminds me of Romeo and Juliet. And of course, Romeo and Juliet is a work of fiction, but it's based on, like the idea is these two Italian families feuding a lot. So I'm wondering, how common was family feuds in their culture?
Oh, I mean, well, like the, you have like the mafia from Italy, and they call like different families and stuff. But the mafia wasn't considered bad. They were just like people who stood up and defended like the common people, and they just called them like different families and stuff. So it was kind of like that. Like it's crazy enough. She's this great saint, but you have this. I don't know if I can't say if it was like mafia, but you have this very gangster like attitude from like this Paolo guy, like just a really big like like not really caring for what's legal, illegal. I don't know if the guy was selling drugs or what. He cheated on her a lot. I think that was one of the issues too. So who knows? Maybe he was hoarding prostitutes. I have no idea. So you get into this problem. If you're a guy with many problems and temperament, you attract also those violent people in your circle. And the Chiqui was like another family, and maybe they ran a business, and maybe his business ran into their. There was like a conflict of interest, so to speak. So I think it's very common. Italians they come from hot temper. They're a hot tempered people, and they're not afraid to speak their minds. That there is no. It's not like you would say like in the Far East. There's more conservative behavior. They're very passive people and not really prone to violence. But I'm not saying that Italians are naturally violent. I'm just saying that they're more on the social side. So they're never afraid to express themselves. So probably things can just sort of escalate and stuff. It's just part of the culture. So I think, yes, family feuds are more common in Italy. They have they're against the government because the government regulates everything. So they run their own businesses. They're very self-willed people. So that self-will oftentimes translates into feuds and problems. So that is common. She wanted the sons wanted to avenge the death of their father, and like I said, she was terrified of the fact of her sons, having to go to hell for committing murder. Like she immediately just breaks down in prayer, asks God to just take them, to get sick and pass away, whatever. So they died of a disease called dysentery, and they both passed away. And she was broken over the loss of her family, but she was just glad that they weren't going to be judged for any mortal sins, on their souls or anything like that. So she's now 30 years old. She's a childless widow, and she goes to the Augustinian monastery. And she had felt the call long time ago, and she wanted to enter the monastery. So the sisters at first didn't let her enter. They were very hesitant due to her history of violence and scandals associated with her husband and sons. So she continued to ask God to give her permission to enter the convent and be granted the opportunity. So she publicly denounced the feud between the two families, and basically easing the problem, the conflicts that happened. And then later she was able to join the convent. Like she's basically saying, I'm not taking anybody's side. This was wrong altogether, and I'm just here for God. I don't agree with what happened or anything like that, and I wasn't, I wouldn't condone that kind of behavior. So at the age of 36, she was able to put the feud to rest, and she entered the Augustinian community, and the two families. Okay, so basically, when she became a convent, when she became a nun at the convent, she was filling her days with prayer, contemplation, spiritual reading. She already had a lot of these virtues her whole life. So she was naturally a very great example for all the nuns. Um, and on Good Friday in the year 1442, she was praying before an image of Christ being crucified. And as she was contemplating on his love and sacrifice, um, basically, she asked that she would share with the suffering of Christ, very similar to Saint Veronica, which was the last saint that I talked about. And I believe it said like the story goes that a thorn from the crown which Christ was crucified on in that picture ended up like coming out of the picture and struck a wound in her forehead. And this wound would be visible for the next 15 years until her death. So she was 76. And so, you figure from 61 all the way to her passing, she had this wound on her head. And so a lot of people saw this. And a lot of people would say, well, that just, why is it that, something like that would be shown to other people? Wouldn't that be a personal matter, a personal relationship between you and God? But God permits other people to see their sufferings or to know about them, to bring sinners to repentance, to convert and to become part of the church. And oftentimes the saints draw in, the worst of the worst, because a lot of the people who are very violent, very away from the church, they sometimes need more convincing to believe that, there is a God, and that there is something called salvation, and that there is something called eternal life. So when they see the obvious working through these saints, they become convicted and they end up converting. So that's part of how God draws people to salvation, is some things have to be visualized. So towards the end of her life, her health became worse and worse, and she visited a cousin who asked her if she needed anything from her old home. And I think she said that there was some flowers growing in the middle of winter, and she asked her cousin um, uh, uh, if she can bring some roses or something like that, or something from the old house. And her cousin said, no, there's nothing out there from the there's no roses or garden in the front of your old house, they're gone and everything. She said, no, just go and and just get me a rose. I know you'll find some roses there. And she knew for a fact there was no garden or anything like that. But when she got to her old house, her cousin got to her old house, she saw a rose blooming amid a snow-covered bush. So she returned that rose to Saint Rita, who accepted it with all grace and stuff. So that was just a small little miracle. Another miraculous work that happened in her life is she was asked to grow a wooden stick in the ground on the side of one of the convent walls. They kind of set like a little garden on the side, or a small little maybe some tapers or something like that. I'm not sure, but she tried to grow a wooden stick on the ground, and the nuns thought she was crazy, but that was part of the obedience. So the mother, the abbot of the monastery, told her to just stick this wooden stick in the ground and start watering it. So of course most nuns thought she was crazy or something wrong with her, but that was part of the obedience, part of that humility, so to speak. So what ended up happening was, after a number of years, that stick grew into a grapevine. Until this day, it's still there, that very grapevine at that convent that she was in, and it's produced grapes, and they're able to gather it, every year. So so she continued to be a great example in the monastery. Um, and it was definitely, when she came to the monastery first, definitely God had comforted her and showed her that her previous life and the things that went wrong, it wasn't her fault. A lot of times maybe she could have felt guilty, of maybe some things that had happened, but she felt that God was always with her. So she died peacefully on May 22nd, 1457, and the bells of the church began to sound on their own without any human hands. As the nuns prepared for her burial in a wooden coffin, the carpenter laminated that he had not that he, that had he not suffered a stroke, he would have been able to make a more beautiful coffin in which to lay such a holy woman. So he also had some idea that she was very spiritual and very holy. And a lot of people were getting to know this saint in the community as well. So the carpenter ended up getting healed because of his humility, and he ended up carving her a very beautiful wooden coffin. And so yeah, so she's now till this day she's laying on this coffin that carpenter carved for her, and her body was remained on display to all the local people to see, and they called her the peacemaker of Cassia. Her face was so peaceful in the coffin, and her body remained incorrupted. So her burial became more and more delayed, and they noticed that her body's remains were not suffering the decay. Um, and so they ended up putting her in a glass enclosure in the Basilica in Cassia. So, they don't just put her body out there because she's holy. I mean, the people can't be seeing a decaying body. It's just not appropriate. But when they saw that it was not, they then put it in a glass display. She bore a lot of pains overall, a lot of challenges in her marriage. She was a mother, she was a wife, and she became a nun. She became a great saint. And so she was chosen to be the patron saint of people who are facing all sorts of struggles. So, in her artwork, I mean, maybe some people, maybe some viewers, I have no idea. I've certainly seen in her artwork that she's depicted as an Augustinian nun wearing like the black and white, which would be historically incorrect. That was like of a different order of nuns. This was the Augustinian order, so really what they were wearing were like white garments and like brown robes, I guess. And so there's another, you'll find her in a picture where she's kneeling before a crucifix, and the wound from the thorn in her forehead is shown there. And it's also common to see the roses as well, that she's has like a batch of roses, I guess, she's holding, and the one that bloomed in her garden during the winter. So that's another famous piece of artwork. She has a special prayer for intercession. She has a prayer for healing. Um, you know, uh, for anybody who's sick or suffering any sort of disease. Like I said, there was I don't know if I mentioned this earlier when I first started talking about her, but there was a lady. She said that when she was 6 years old, she was passing away in the hospital, and her parents had brought in a priest to pray over her, and the priest had a small little medal of Saint Rita, and that they had the medal put under the girl's pillow while she went to sleep, and the next morning she woke up fully, just fully awake, fully healed and everything. So apparently the prayers of this saint has delivered people from death. So I can't even begin to tell you how great this saint is. We're still learning more and more about her. I think that speaks volumes. I think I think that says a lot. Obviously. So yeah, overall, this was a saint very comparable to Saint Veronica, very similar in that they both suffered for Christ. They were both honored, and they became very practical people. I mean, at the end of the day, they did all these things. They were so humble that at the end of their lives, they were basically saying, I just needed God more to do more normal things, to be a human being. And that's a common thing you see with the saints. But they did more than just regular people, right? They suffered for people. They suffered for Christ, and they brought so many people to the faith. They led so many people to repentance, and saved many souls throughout their life. So Saint Veronica, obviously very similar story with the suffering that she endured, and her body as well being incorrupted. Like I said, she passed away when she was 76 in the monastery and or in the convent, and basically she's venerated in the Roman Catholic Church. If I didn't mention that, in 1626 she was beatified by Pope Urban VIII, and she was canonized in the year 1900, May 24th, in the Vatican, in Rome, by Pope Leo VIII. And like I said, her major shrine is in the Basilica of Santa Rita de Cascia in Cascia, Italy, and her feast day is May 22nd. And so sometimes you'll also see artworks, including the grapevine as well. I just remember that. The bees as well. You might see in her artwork some bees around the area where she's praying to the crucifix. The bees goes back way back when she was a little baby. Her parents saw a bunch of bees surrounding her mouth, and that she ended up smiling and being very happy, and the bees never harmed her. And the priest happened to see that. I think they were at the church service or something, and he said that she was going to be used for a very great work in her life, and she was chosen by God to do very wonderful things. He sort of prophesied that. Why is she considered the patron saint for the lost and the impossible causes? Because her whole life was a miracle. I mean, it's absolutely impossible, all the things she went through. She wanted to be a nun, which back in that time, if you want to be a nun, you're going to go be a nun. During that time, convents and monasteries were growing very fast. It was becoming a very common way of life. But no, she didn't get that. Even though she sought to do something great for God, she still followed the will of God. She obeyed her parents. Then she married a very violent man, a guy we can pretty much say is very gangster-like, a gangster fashion, if you will. She has two sons with them, and they're caught up in all this murder, and she's trying to prevent her two sons from committing crime, and all three of them pass away. And then after all that, she comes to become a nun. Then after all that, she becomes to be a famous nun because she endured much more suffering for Christ, and performed many miraculous, a lot of miraculous events. She was part of many miraculous events. And then after she passed away, 500 years later, people start hearing about her. 500 years after she's passed away, her body's incorrupted. All these 500 years, and they finally find out that she's answering people's prayers, and people are learning about her story. So now she has churches all over the world named after her, and paintings and artwork everywhere. So yeah, I would say that her life is pretty impossible to have happened. So definitely, in any type of situation you're in, a lot of people say, ask Saint Rita for it. Sicknesses, wounds, marital problems. I mean, that goes without saying. So she had marital issues. A lot of couples who are facing divorce or something like that, or abuse from a family member or something, can pray about this. So, and ask Saint Rita for comfort and for her intercession. And that's pretty much it. I mean, as far as that goes, people, there's more. I'm sure there's more miracles that we're going to find out about her life. I'm sure many more people are going to be coming forward on social media. I happen to come across a lot of comments of people saying that this saint has interceded for them and helped answer so many prayers and did many miracles for them. So this is a very big saint here, and so I thought that it would be very important for people to learn about her, and it was very much related to Saint Veronica, very similar her life. So that's and that is the life of Saint Rita. There you have it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think I was going to ask, I know Saint Veronica because I did some reading on my own when I was putting together the slideshow. Only a Saint Veronica, she had all these journals like a lot of written material, and only a small fraction has been released or disclosed. Is there some sort of similar thing with Saint Rita? Like, did she have journals or did she write any books?
I don't think she has any type of journaling or any type of books, to be honest with you. Most of her life has been passed from one generation to another about what people know about her. No, she wasn't. Saint Veronica, she did a lot of things for the church. She wrote a lot of different letters and stuff, and she was actually considered one of the. They called her one of the doctors, one of the doctors of the church, so to speak. Saint Rita wasn't involved in the church belief, so to speak, or any sort of documenting of her past experiences or things that she went through. She led a more simpler life, I would say. But at the same time, I think what we can say is we're finding more and more about her. So I can't tell you all the answers, but there's still more to learn about this saint, because people are still finding out about her 500 years later. I've always heard about her growing up, I've been around the Catholic Church, I've been around the Orthodox Church, so I came across her church before, a small church next to a cathedral named after Saint Mark in Port Said, where my mother grew up. I went to Egypt and we went to that church, and that church actually is famous. It's got a picture of Saint Mary, and constantly produces oil all year round from this picture. And then there's a small church next to cathedral named after Saint Rita. So I wanted to know more about her story, but there are no journals, so to speak. It's just been a very consistent account of all these things that she's went through, and now we're hearing things about all these people giving their accounts about the prayers that she's answered, the miracles that have happened in their lives due to the prayers of this saint.
So I got another question then. So you said there's a church named after her in Egypt?
Yes.
Is it a Catholic church?
No, this is a Coptic Orthodox church, not a cathedral, sorry. It's a church named after Saint Mary in Port Said, where my mother grew up. And then there's a small church named after Saint Rita next to it.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking about. Was that a Catholic church or a Coptic?
Oh, this is Coptic.
So then the Coptic church also recognizes her as a saint?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
There's no doubt about it. All most of the saints, if not all of them, are recognized by the Orthodox Church. We still consider the church an apostolic church. We're talking about, when we talk about separation between the churches, we're talking about the doctrines, certain concepts, certain points in the theology or the dogma or something like that. But there is no doubt that the sacraments are all the same, and they partake of the communion. They're performing all the sacraments, and they're leading very faithful lives, and very wonderful saints have come from the Catholic Church, and many people, even in the Coptic Church, use these saints as intercessors.
Okay.
Yeah,
That was my question as well. So that's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah.
But I don't think there's full reciprocity, because I don't know, like Joan of Arc, is she considered a saint in the Coptic Church or just a historical figure?
That's a good question. I think maybe somewhere in history that the church has adopted her as a saint, but they would recognize her as saint. But I don't know if she's officially canonized in our church, like all the other Catholic saints, really. But I wouldn't be surprised if we decided pretty much recognize all the the full list of the saints, because you got to understand, like these saints they were leading very bright, lives. I mean, they were so big, and so it was almost impossible to not honor them and to canonize them in the church, so that people would know about them and their stories, and have a feast day for them, and continuously ask for their intercession. So we can't doubt. Joan of Arc. I've never heard anybody, having a saint and a sister such as Joan of Arc. I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if we recognize her as a saint.
Yeah, I imagine though that like when it comes to anything, because in the Catholic Church, before they designate anybody as a saint, they have some kind of council where they decide. And I would imagine that, since it's a different hierarchy, that before the Coptic Church would recognize, a Catholic saint, they would probably have to deliberate on it and decide whether or not they wanted to. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I'm thinking. I imagine that not all of them would get ported over. Like there's some that the historicity is in question, like, Saint Brendan, which we talked about in one of our older videos. That guy may or may not have existed. And probably, I mean, that's something that you could probably find out is like, I mean, you never heard of Saint Brendan before, so my guess is probably not. He's probably not recognized. But yeah, I mean, that's what I was just wondering about. What the process is.
I mean, you have Saint Teresa, you have Saint Veronica, you have Saint Rita, Saint Francis of Assisi. There's all sorts. I mean, there's a lot of nuns. Come to think about it, actually, there's a Saint Christina the Astonishing. There's
thousands, I'm sure, by now. Oh, it sounds like his sound is out.
Yeah, I know, Ivory, you and I are both not Orthodox or Catholic,
Yeah.
but I do like how the saints kind of bring faith down to earth, like they make it more tangible and more day to day, like, marital problems. That's interesting to me. So, but I hope Great Pharaoh can get his sound back and rejoin us. I did start reading a book about Orthodoxy and how it works, and I'm pretty sure that each that they have people that review different things, so they wouldn't just adopt any saint. I think they have to go through a review process as well.
Yeah, they must, because they definitely don't have, they don't fall under the same hierarchy. They wouldn't approve of something just because, like, the Vatican approved of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do like nuns. I miss nuns. You used to see more nuns than you do nowadays, way more. I saw a couple the other day, and I was like, oh, it's nuns, because usually you think it's like Muslims nowadays, lots of veils. It's like,
Well,
no, it's nuns. It's like, oh, I got excited. And they're probably here as tourists, like, from Italy or something, or maybe not. But I do think, yeah, anyway, they're
hear me or not? Hello?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
You're back. We're just talking about that your sound cut out, and we're talking a little bit about how we're not from the same church background, but that we, at least I appreciate the saints, and I appreciate nuns as well. So yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, man. You were mentioning the nuns, and how you said that you weren't sure sometimes because it seems like it's the Muslims who are wearing the veil.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell the difference. The way that the nuns
I can tell as well. I was just pleasantly surprised, and I think they were Italian or something like that.
So you got triggered for a split second, and then you're
no. No, I was positive. It's like they're awesome. I'd love to see more nuns and more history and more churches, Orthodox and Catholic. I think it's all beautiful and rich. And I mean, God bless these people and God bless these saints. So yeah.
They definitely have very, very good architecture. Like I kind of think that that's one thing that most of the Protestant denominations should learn from Catholics, is that we should make nicer buildings, because most of our buildings, they don't really look like, they're not that fancy. I mean, I know one thing is like when we have extra money, we tend to put it into missions and send people to Africa and other places. But I kind of wish that, you know, we would make nicer buildings too, that
Yeah.
would feel like you're in a, you know, like you should be able to, in my view, you should be able to tell you're in a church. I mean, you still can because there's a cross up front, but it's like, it's very
Dude,
utilitarian for the most part. rather than-
100%. Like our church is in like a school, so we only get it on the weekends. And on the one hand, it's like, yeah, more money for missions and stuff like that. But on the other hand, like I feel like building a beautiful church is another way of worship.
Right.
And like Great Pharaoh mentioned, like people come to faith because of the saints and the beautiful lives that they lived as role models. People also come to faith because of the beautiful art and churches. And I really think that as Protestants, that is really, yeah, we're missing
That's
out.
something most of us
Yeah.
aren't doing, except for like Lutherans. They make some pretty awesome buildings, but
Yeah, and
Lutherans,
a lot of
maybe
Dutch churches
Baptist,
are former Catholic churches.
got
So
converted.
yeah, no.
Well, remember, Stilgar, when we first met, you and Ivor Kovac visited my church, and
Yeah,
because you guys have the sort of the history background. I know, Ivor Kovac has history background, but you went to visit with him, and so to this day, you're still having that connection. You still have this special place sort of in your heart for the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church. From
and I've been researching Orthodox churches nearby, and it's just that there aren't any.
uh,
But it made a huge impact on me. It was just beautiful. The whole service, the rituals, the history, the saints. Yeah, it made
The
a
priest
huge
also
impact on
gave
me.
us bread. Remember that? He gave us
Yeah,
the bread, even though we weren't allowed to have the communion. He still like caught us later on. It was like
yeah,
we still got the bread anyhow.
yeah.
yeah,
Oh, well,
beautiful, man.
like
Yeah, it's nice. I wish people, they just respected it more. Like you can't throw, like it's just so much beautiful history. Wow. Yeah, there's so much there. Anyway, yeah,
yeah. Well, I
yeah,
appreciate you sharing. And oftentimes that's actually the church gets the bad rap because nobody's heard, not a lot of people have heard of the Orthodox Church. Like here in the West, they're more familiar with it, but they always sort of bunch it up with the Catholic Church when there was issues and stuff before the Reformation. So we always get a bad rap that we didn't reform or whatnot, but actually that's also the beauty of our church is the history has been preserved for all those years, and so we didn't, when we had issues with the Catholic Church, when we broke off, we didn't there were no other churches that broke off from the Orthodox Church, so it was able to preserve all of those hymns, all of the texts, all of the books, all of everything, and for all those years, for 2,000 years, so I think
Yeah,
that is, yeah.
yeah. The Coptic Church. I and some of the stuff we talked about in the other video, like it even goes back to Pharaonic times. And when I look at the Coptic architecture and some of the like the robes and stuff that people have to wear, I can see how, yeah, this is a continuation of the old Egyptian civilization. Like I can see the common threads in the architecture and all that. And as far as like any of our audience goes, yeah, in America, they don't really, most people probably don't know the difference between any kind of Orthodox and Catholic. But one way you can tell is Catholic churches make use of 3D images. They put statues and stuff, whereas the Orthodox churches, everything is two-dimensional, like it's painted. They don't really make use of statues.
Yeah. Well, I want to also make a point, though, that we also are considered to be one church. The Bible talks about how all the churches will come together. And, the Protestant churches, the positive things about them, this country was founded on Protestants.
Yeah.
And they wanted to get away from the corruption of the Catholic Church for the sake of Christianity. They actually used the Christian concept of separation of church and state. When Christ said, "Give what Caesar's Caesar's, gives what's God is God's." So the Protestants started the United States of America.
Cool, but hey, man, great Pharaoh. Thanks so much for bringing this great saint to life and sharing her story. Of course, I'd like to see more pictures of the divine in some of these churches, and artwork, of course. And thanks for sharing. And I think probably we should close it off.
Yeah,
and look
sounds
forward
good.
to the next topic. Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you
Thanks,
very much.
great Pharaoh.
Est natura mirante, unus renovatus est a Christo regnante. Gaudete, Christus est natus, ex Maria Virgine, gaudete.